you really want to check in with yourself, especially like journaling is a great process for it. So a lot of times we have all the exact same thoughts rolling around in our head, and then journaling has actually been scientifically proven to make us happier because you create a beginning, middle, and end of that story on paper. And so just whatever is the stuff that's rolling around, and it's going to be a lot of stuff from, what does this say about me? What does this mean? But it's like everyone knows the answer. It's just like we don't want to hear it a lot of times. And so then it's like getting that awareness of being okay. And you're going to be okay no matter what, because as an entrepreneur, this is what we do. We make stuff out of nothing. We figure out things and
Thank you so much for being on PivotMe today. I'm so glad we finally made this interview happen.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, April.
Absolutely. So you and I got connected through Cameron Herold.
Yes.
I believe it was a trip related to Cameron Herold, right? That's how this all began?
Yeah, the possibility of going to Antarctica.
Yes, it sounds so good. We talked about it as like the one continent I'm missing. So it's really appealing now. Apparently that's the one continent that Cameron's missing too. So
exactly, yep.
We're all crossing stuff off the bucket list.
And I didn't even realize that that's my seventh continent as well. I was like going back and thinking about it, like, oh. Excellent.
Is it really?
Yeah, so now
oh God, now there's so much significance built around it. Now we've got to go. Okay. All right. So
and penguins.
What was that?
And penguins.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's not a lot of places you can see them, and they seem like pretty remarkable flightless birds. So tell me about, so there's so many questions that I want to ask you. Yeah. We were just talking about that before we went on, but so many questions I want to ask you about. But first, I'd love for you to tell us about Maverick 1000, what it is and why you started it.
Sure. It's actually one of those pivot moments for sure. So just super quick background. I got started, actually even maybe tiny bit, I'll go back a little bit, which is our family came over from Russia when I was 3, and I grew up in a family business, medical equipment, sales and service. So been in the entrepreneurial space for a long time. At 14, my dad had me telemarketing. And then at 16, the only way I could get a car is if I went out and cold called doctors. So I was, and then I had a doctor client give me a tape about direct response marketing. He's like, yeah, I think you would like this. And literally turned on the lights. And then I helped grow my dad's business from like a regional player to a national player using these marketing and copywriting skills. And then so the internet started coming around, and I was like, oh, this looks really, really interesting. And in 2000, I left my dad's business, which was a really hard decision, and started on my own with a little idea at 3 o'clock in the morning. So another pivot moment, I think. I've had a lot of pivot moments. And the question I asked myself, I think your questions really dictate your answers. And the question was, how do I create a fully automatic website that makes me money while I sleep and is an incredible value to people? And I literally got up at 3 o'clock in the morning with the idea for something called instant sales letters, and got to work on it. No tech skills, like I couldn't put up a website, still can't. And but I found someone that could do it, and literally, was making money in my sleep. That kind of the ultimate wish sort of thing. And then that turned into something that people are like, wow, how did you do that? Could you teach me how to do that? And so that turned into a whole nother career, helping people take their information and knowledge and share that online. And that was going really well. Outside looking in, had all the success that you would imagine. And then just asked myself another question, which was, am I happy? Would I be happy doing what I'm doing 10 years from now? And when I was honest, the answer was no. And so that was this pivot moment of, okay, what would that look like? And in my journal, it was 3 interconnected circles. It was a dollar sign, a happy face, and a heart. And where that all connected is what I call the Maverick entrepreneur. And then I'm like, all right, well, it's kind of like scratching my own itch. I'm like, oh, let's put on these awesome adventures with my peers and friends, and we'll go off in the middle of nowhere and go Baja Dune buggy racing and have business sessions and have adventures and have a charity element. And it all sounds amazing. Except for the fact that on that first trip, we lost about $40,000. And then that turned into about $400,000. And my wife's like, what the hell are you doing? So that was another potential pivot moment as well. But it all started as an opportunity to scratch my own itch. And so Maverick is really about bringing together exceptional entrepreneurs that care about growth, impact, and fun.
That is amazing. I love
a little longer response on that one, but
no, it's perfect. So I love the story of the doctor giving you the tape on direct response marketing. I love that that's the one who kind of also helped with your pivot. That's amazing. So gosh, there's so many things I want to ask about. So with the idea, I love the idea of you ask a better question, you get a better answer, right? So when you woke up at, you said 2 a.m, 3 a.m.
Yeah, 3 a.m. It's the first time.
Did you wake up with the question or did you wake up with the answer?
With the answer, yeah. I believe in that incubation process. So you give yourself that question and you allow it to incubate. And I use my journal for a lot of that too. Like I love questions. So the better the question, the better the answer. And then just let your subconscious work on it. But then also there's a journaling process, and I can talk about it now or we can talk about it later, but how to answer these questions.
Yeah.
Also use that intuitive, creative side and even the wiser side. And then I have some pretty out there processes too for journaling and getting these answers to questions.
I definitely want to talk about the journaling process in 1 second. I do want to point out something. So you just point out several different pivot points. How does one navigate those? So you've had success in your father's business and you leave it. You go and do this other business and then you leave it. You start this, this idea of this adventure kind of, event, and then you have to pivot again. When did you know you needed to pivot? And what kind of mindset did you have to be able to do that pivot and not feel like a failure?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people are like, "Oh, once you're successful, you got it made," but it actually gets a little bit harder to make those pivots. And I call them
track record.
Yeah, and other identity pieces that you're connected to, and just a lot of things that you're I call it this like inadvertent success trap. And so the people that I really look up to and respect are like, let's say David Bowie, continually reinventing. Madonna was really great at that. U2 stayed relevant. Like this whole idea of reinventing and continually reinventing is really, really powerful. Or you get stuck in a concept that others kind of made up for you, that originally was your own concept, but then you get stuck in it. And so the ways that I've looked at when I know it's time to pivot, I call it a cosmic alarm clock. I think it's like this little subtle voice or little thing that is very quiet, and the more still you are, the more you're gonna be able to listen to it. So I encourage like mindfulness practices and so forth. But even if you don't have that, it's going to continue showing up, and it starts as like a little whisper, and it gets louder and louder, and you can either hit snooze or you can answer it. And so it's also like, to me, like how you're feeling. Like if you're kind of depressed and frustrated and annoyed, and you just realize that you're not doing what you're meant to be doing, and it's not fun. And of course, in business as an entrepreneur, you're going to have days that are not fun, because that comes with the territory.
Sure.
You signed up for this. This is, your responsibility is when it works and when it doesn't work and so forth. But when you have a lot of those days, and when it continues multiplying, and you're just like, this is not for me, then you really do have to take these important questions and start working on them and seeing, okay, what does that look like? And of course, there's a whole grass is greener on the other side kind of process where you're like, oh, well, this would be the ultimate thing. And
sure.
And anytime you get there, you're like, well, that's not it. But the process is really powerful. And so with my dad's business, it was like, I thought I was going to take it over, grow it, and keep growing. And then at some point I'm like, no, I really want my own thing. And it was a very difficult decision, because then I was like disappointing your dad and all these things that came with it. But every time I've made those hard decisions, it's always been about how do I be true to myself? Like, and it's like, I talk about like following your heart is often scary, but never wrong. And so that point, and then the pivoting, like this whole idea of Maverick pivoting, where it's like, okay, well, something's going on here. So my wife was like, what the hell is going on? So she was helpful with that, because I had a bit of like an open checkbook from the other company, like, oh, well, you can just do whatever you want. But then my passion was fading over on the other side of the other company, because it just wasn't what I was meant to be doing. And so I could have easily gone back to almost like golden handcuffs, and gone back to what I knew I could do, and it was easy. But every time you do that, like your soul dies a little bit inside, because you're not doing what you're meant to be doing. And so then it went back to, okay, what is my real why here? And the why wasn't to build an adventure travel company. It was to change the way business is played. And so really like doubling down and getting deeper onto what is the reason why you're doing this. And then it like, so I asked another question, And the question was, what would my 111-year-old self tell me?
Mm,
And so the answer to that, and I used my non-dominant hand, so I'm right-handed, I used my left hand, and the answer
mhm.
was light 1,000 suns who each have the potential to light another 1,000 suns. And that's when we changed everything, like made it more about this evolutionary growth for entrepreneurs, made it like just really changed things up where it wasn't just about the adventure trip.
Mhm.
It was truly about growth and what does that look like?
Wow. So we've just stumbled upon one of the other reasons why I'm pretty sure you and I just became friends. One of my journaling prompts is, what does 80-year-old April tell current
Nice.
day April? So it's the same,
Yeah,
because people always say like, well, what would you tell your 16-year-old self? And I
right.
love that concept, but I always flipped it to, well, what would 80-year-old April tell current day
Totally.
April? And listen to her, because she's seen a few things at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know if you've ever done this, but have you ever worked with your non-dominant hand?
I haven't. When you said that, and I know the significance of it. So
Yeah.
in university, I studied biology and chemistry, and
Okay.
they would talk about, you make new connections by doing things with your
Right.
non-dominant hand, driving home in a different direction versus the predictable path you always drive to work, things like that. And as soon as you said that, I was taken back to my university days and thought that would actually help.
Yeah. And so it's really powerful. Like that answer that I got, I was like, wow, that's like, and I stumbled on this, like, so I play ice hockey still, men's league. I grew up playing hockey, and it's a non-checking league, but sometimes it gets a little rough. And so I came home. I usually would journal almost every single night, and
Mhm.
I came home. I got checked or hit or something. I felt really hard on my right elbow, and I'm like, I feel like I have this book on non-dominant left-hand writing somewhere. Let me go find this thing. And it was a book called Thought Revolution by who's now a friend of mine, a guy named Bill Donius,
Mhm.
and he works with like Fortune 500 companies on innovation strategies, and he takes them through a process of non-dominant handwriting, answering questions like that. And then he learned it from a child psychologist, I think Lucia Carpicciano.
Mm.
And so it's a really, really powerful process of connecting your whole brain. And
Mhm.
so I used it because I couldn't write with my right hand. I was like, holy cow, what, this is really, really interesting, the insights that I was getting. And so
Wow.
now I'll continue using it. And so I love like taking a question, putting it at the top of my journal page, writing multiple answers, because one answer is just going to give you really
Mhm.
a pedestrian, whatever your typical answer
Sure.
is. But keep going, keep going, keep going. And then you add your non-dominant hand. Then
Mhm.
it's really, really interesting as well. Or, the other ways that I've done that is you could have your 80-year-old self, your 80-year-old April, and then you have
Mhm.
a conversation back and forth. So you use your right hand, your dominant hand to ask the questions, and then you use your non-dominant to answer as this other archetype. And so I've done that as my 11-year-old self, as my 111-year-old self. And then I also have a set of really cool like journal oracle cards, and it has 11 archetypes in there. So again, some out there stuff, and then you can have conversations with some really interesting archetypes like the universe,
Mhm.
or your activated ally, or your divine dragon, and it's all interesting ways of getting some new input.
I love this idea. I love the idea of having the conversation too. I know the significance of using your non-dominant hand. Like I said,
Right.
it, as soon as you said it, took me back to that lecture I remember listening to, and I thought, God, this is brilliant. Also, when you kept
This is
asking
a
the,
111-year-old self. This is what that looked like for my illustration of it.
oh, I love it. That is, I love it. Um, it also reminds me of 7 levels of why, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah. Right. And keep going deeper and get to the real essence, which is so funny because it almost all comes back to either wanting to be loved, or just
Totally.
something that, just wanting to be happy, or being in fear of something. Like
Sure.
it's like such a, it's fascinating to,
It's kind of like these 4 core things that are
right,
driving us: significance and belonging and all those things. And we just
right,
layer in all these, we put in all these layers of complexity. So it looks different, but ultimately it comes back to these same 4 or 5 things over and over again. We
right.
can address those things. We get to address all the layers that go on top of those things. Oh, that's so good. Okay. So you made these pivots. So I actually, I want to talk about something else that you said, and then,
Okay.
we'll move on. But when you said about people think that once you have a certain level of success, that it gets easier. And we
Yeah.
know that that is not true, because then you have this track record of being successful, and it's very hard to switch gears. So, a conversation we've had on PivotMe a few times is when people have been successful, most self-made millionaires have lost on average their fortune twice. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 times. Sometimes it's one or it's none. But we talk about what it looks like after that. So after that huge, whatever that downturn was, or this inflection point that happens in your life, how hard it is to crawl back up. And sometimes it is harder for successful people because there's an expectation around them. There's a reputation. There's our ego. I mean, it can drive us and it can hurt us too. Talk to me about what it was like how you got over that, how you said, okay, I was doing this thing and then everybody knew me as this thing. And then I was going to go do something else. And I was really rolling the dice. How did you navigate that?
Well, at first it's easy because I had 7 or 8 projects. I'll hit the 7-figure mark, like without a business plan, just, I was like, kind of like Midas touch, like everything was really easy. And then I'm like, all right, well, what was going to make me happy? Like that whole question of, am I happy? Would I be happy 10 years from now? I'm like, oh, it's this thing. And so I do believe in like putting the stake in the ground and making it happen. And so I've done that a lot of times for anything. And so this was like, all right, well, I'm going to go make this Baja Dune buggy racing trip happen. And that was the first thing. And I'm like, we're going to do it completely different now. My other company, we started with $1,800. This is like, we're going to get the right branding for it. We're going to, do all these things. And before even knowing if it works or not. And so that's one of the benefits of bootstrapping and not having a lot of capital originally, because you're forced to be creative and
sure.
and be scrappy. And so that wasn't the constraint that I had. And so when I lost that 40,000 on that first trip, I'm like, whatever, it's an investment, it's a whole different kind of business. And then at 400,000, it was like, all right, well, something needs to change because the other company's not making me much money anymore. So I'm not paying attention to it. And so that's when it got real as far as like, okay, how committed am I to what this thing is? And that's when it got really unknown, because I knew what the other one was. I could go back and do that, but that wasn't going to fulfill me. And then the unknown was like, let's just see what happens. But I didn't have the safety net anymore of a bunch of extra income coming in. And so even like to the point where I sold my Aston Martin, and it was like, oh, it was either between selling my Aston Martin or selling my ticket to space. So I have a ticket to Virgin Galactic. I'm like, I can buy a thing anytime, but this is an experience. I'm going to hold on to this. And then I had like our third car, which is kind of like it was not a beat up, but it wasn't as nice, obviously, like a little MDX. And so it got to the point where I was like, first I was like really annoyed. I'm like, all right, I sold my sports car that really identify, like guys especially, I think identify a lot with their cars equal their success. And so I'm like, okay, well, let me sit with this for a little while, because I easily could have like leased another car that would have been in line with, what would be in my neighborhood of success or whatever. But I'm like, no, I'm gonna ride this out. I want to see what this is about, because so many times as entrepreneurs, especially, our net worth is connected to our self-worth is connected to our net worth.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, let's see what's happening here. And I wanted to really examine it. And then I'm like, oh, this is actually really cool. I can stick my paddle boards in here. I don't have to get my car detailed all the time. I can park it anywhere.
Yes.
And it finally got to the spot where I was like really thankful and grateful for having that MDX. And I knew I had reached an interesting inflection point, because I was like driving down the road, and we live in a pretty affluent area, but you still don't very often see, Aston Martins and other cars, but you do on occasion. And then so I saw one, and I saw a convertible one, and it was like a perfect like 70-degree day. And I'm like, I just like blessed that person. I was like, I hope they are having an amazing day. Like, instead of having like that little bit of like tightening, like that could have been me. And then I knew I was like ready for something else. And it was really, really fascinating too, because I like going back in my journals. And a couple of years before my 40th birthday, and this is before this sort of turn where things were going sideways, I had written, I have $10 million in the bank. I'm driving a Fisker Karma. I'm doing these different things and going out to dinner for my birthday with these kind of different people and celebrities. And it was really interesting going back, and I showed it to my wife. She's like, oh, are you upset that this didn't happen? And I looked at it. I'm like, no, because I think I have pretty much the essence of all these. Like the money in the bank was work on projects that you want to do with people that you want to work on. With the Fisker Karma ended up being a little bit of a lemon. So I'm happy I never bought one of those. And then like the going out to dinner for my birthday with people that I love, like it ended up actually, I got invited to a safari with Richard Branson like 2 weeks after my birthday. And then I was on my actual birthday, my 40th, I was at the Mojave Desert at Virgin Galactic, like for the unveiling of the spaceship. So it was like even better than what I imagined.
Yeah.
And so like that intention, I think is really, really big. So when you're holding on to that intention, that to me is the driver for everything. But you have to, like, in order to keep going up this spiral of evolutionary growth, really, you have to give up something. And it's difficult to give up. So I think the universe sort of bonks you on the head harder and harder to get you moving in the right direction. So mine was like that 400,000. One of my friends that I had lunch with a couple of years ago, when I was telling him that story, he's like, yours was 400,000, mine was 4 million. I'm like, oh yeah, that's
so you're faster learners than him,
I guess,
right?
But it
you shaved off a zero.
Yeah, but it could be financial, it could be health, it could be relationship. And that usually moves us in that direction. Like I think joy is kind of our GPS, and it's continually driving us. So that's our intention. And then the pain are like your guardrails. And the guardrails can be big. These are the bigger bumps on the head. Or if you're in a line with your head, which is your business side, your marketing side, your heart, your impact side, and then your higher purpose, like why are you here? Then those guardrails are smaller and tighter, and it's just easier kind of navigation.
But what's interesting is when you were explaining that, one of the things I heard you say is that you have to get quiet, you have to get still to hear it. And that is not what entrepreneurs are known for. Like we hustle, we move fast. And I think that when we don't have that stillness to hear that, I think he's called it the cosmic alarm clock. We don't hear it. And so then we just put a bunch of stuff on top to quiet it. And there's all sorts of ways that we can do that, right? That just create distraction in our life because we don't want to look at this over here. Don't look over here. Let's look over there. I love that you pointed out that you have to get still. Again, not necessarily inherent in our DNA, but we should still do that because that's when we get our answers.
Totally. And I never thought, I could meditate. Like I had a million ideas a minute, and meditation's gotten bigger and bigger now. It's really interesting. Like if I would have asked a room of entrepreneurs who meditates, like, I don't know, 8 years ago or 10 years ago, it would have been like maybe 10%. And now it's like 60% of the room, which is great. And it's a concept that, has been just as centering for me.
Yeah.
Where it's like just a non-negotiable, where every day, usually twice a day, and it really helps. Even if you can do it even like for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and there's a lot of cool gadgets and things that can help you with that. But it doesn't have to be meditation; it can be something else. But it's also the awareness of bringing awareness, like you said, that stillness of looking at something and examining it. And if you can't do that, then you're going to continue running away from it. And we're really good as entrepreneurs to just go without examining why are we actually doing it.
Yeah. And we chase the shiny new object a lot. You know, I think meditation has become more popular, and I think there's a lot of talk about it, which helped. And then there's a lot of apps, like Insight Timer and Calm and all these things out there that have helped. One thing I'll just say on meditation is, obviously we know the benefits, they're huge. If you're listening now and you struggle with meditation, if you struggle kind of quieting the mind, guided meditation is a really good solution to that. So if you turn on Calm, you turn on Insight Timer, and you put on even a 5-minute guided meditation, it kind of helps that sort of monkey brain that's bouncing around and over here and over here and over here. It can really help you sort of harness those 5 minutes better. I loved the idea of meditation, but I had a really hard time with unguided meditation. And once I started guided meditation, I was like, I'm in, I love it, but I needed somebody with that voice to guide me through.
Yeah, it's so I look at everything as like experiments. And so I had the good fortune of one of our Maverick events. We were working with Russell Simmons, who's a big hip hop mogul, and he's really big into yoga and meditation and so forth. And I was reading his book, and I'm like, all right, this dude who's super ADHD, if he can meditate, if he can do all this stuff, I'm like, I'm going to give it a try. And using his process, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to give it an experiment until I go into my interview with him. And between him and a couple other friends, like a guy named Vishen Lakhiani, who started Mind Valley, is a friend of mine, and Tom Cronin, like I was like, all right, I can figure this out. And then I just did it as an experiment, and it's stuck now for, I don't know, 7-8 years. and it's been really, really centering and incredible. But everything to me is that experiment. So if you give it 21 days, like meditation or journaling or all these processes are
Sure.
not like switch moments. They're not like, all right, I do it for one day, I'm like, all right, I'm great, I'm enlightened, or I'm whatever. Like
It's a dimmer switch.
yeah, and it builds on each other. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like I would rather meditate for 5 minutes a day for a month than do it for, I don't know, an hour once a week or something like that.
Yeah.
Like you get a lot more benefit out of the continuity of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about it as an experiment, then like, especially like the journaling, because I'm a huge proponent of that. But
Yeah.
like, I'm going to give this a try for, like, for me, it's 33 days. I'll do things like no sugar, no alcohol, or different things. And I'm like, and then you, at the end of it, you're like, all right, did this make my life better?
Yeah.
And by having an experiment, you have an end date. And it's just like, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what we do once in a while. It matters what we consistently do. It's the consistent execution that really changes our lives and business.
But then we also like get wrapped up in like, oh, I should be journaling, or I should be meditating.
Yeah.
And then you just like have that guilt, and you're like, oh, I need to do all these things. I need to have an hour and a half morning routine. And then I have that hour and a half, cool down routine at night. And then, so then you get yourself all wrapped up, because also we're overachievers and many times. And then we're like, oh, we need to do everything right. And then, instead of just being like, all right, let's see what works here for us.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I was actually a big fan of the Savers morning routine that Cameron Herold and Hal Elrod talked about. What I loved is it was scalable. And so we talked about it in PivotMe, and I talk about it in my masterminds as well. You can do it's essentially 6 parts, it's all the acronym for Savers. And you can each do one, or you can do each one of those for 1 minute. And so anyone's got 6 minutes in the morning, because I need to remind people that some people don't want to get up at 4:30. I'm an early riser, and I get up and I'm right in the hustle. That's also, I enjoy that. There's lots of clients that I work with that don't enjoy it. They're like, 7 a.m. is pushing it for me. They don't have to have my morning routine. They don't have to have Robin Sharma's morning routine. They do need to have something that they can consistently execute on. So definitely don't be looking for perfection. Just be looking for consistent execution and what works for you and the season you're in this life right
and
now.
The other thing I found is like trying to add too many things.
Yeah. For sure. That's a problem. So we talked about your car briefly. We need to go back to that for 2 reasons. One, it's because I have a similar car story, which I'll share real quick. And then 2, I would like you to tell them what you had engraved on was it the door sills?
Yeah.
Actually, go ahead. So go ahead and tell us real quick. So what did you have engraved?
So Aston Martin is, it's the James Bond car.
Oh yeah.
And so we used to run for a decade. We ran an event called the Underground, and it was a spy themed event where the Underground would bring in these real world people that were making lots of money online and to share their unknown people. So it was kind of like spy themed, and like bring them in to share what they were doing.
Sure.
And so I had on the door sill. So when you buy the Aston, it's usually custom built, and you get to choose all the different things. And on the door sill, you can put whatever you want. And I think the door sill said specially made for, which is the standard thing. And then it said, what the heck did it say now?
So what we were told was
Silver, Yanik Silver, or something like that. I can't
Secret
remember.
Agent
That's
Yanik
what
Silver.
That's
what we were told.
That's exactly what it was. Yep, that's exactly what it was. And by the way, we had we used to bring in celebrity guests too. We do that a lot for Maverick events, but we brought in a James Bond, and I can't remember his name now, but he played Bond one time because he was cheaper than the other Bonds. But,
he's the cheap Bond. We'll bring in cheap Bond.
And so I have a great picture of me being fake punched by him in front of my Aston Martin.
That is awesome. That is great. That's a great photo. So the reason why I brought up the car thing, first, I love that you got it engraved. Second, when I read the story of it, here's why it resonated with me so much, is that I was probably, I don't know, maybe 20, 22. I was younger, and I just got into finance. And at the time, I'll never forget, I worked for Wells Fargo and then Chase Manhattan. And I was starting to finance these really big projects, and my boss pulled me in and he said, April, I want you to take a look at this. And at the time I drove like this little pickup truck that I drove in college, and it served my needs at the time. And he's like, look out in the parking lot. And it was, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Lexus was the other one. Or no, Audi, actually it was.
Mhm.
Anyways, he said, look at the sea of nice cars. And he goes, and then look at your pickup truck. And again, I was 22, 23 tops.
Right.
And he said, you have to project an image of success at all times. I never forget what he told me. So that night I went out and I bought him BMW, right? And I was like, I got to do it. So I buy a BMW. My boyfriend at the time, he's like, are you sure you want to do that? I was like, oh yeah. No, this is critical. This is key to success. I got to have the car. And what was funny about it, what I loved when I read your story is I remember 2 weeks later, it was snowboard season. I was a big snowboarder and I was trying to stick my snowboard in the back of the car. One, it didn't fit. Two, I had really nice seats and I kept thinking my bindings are going to tear the seats on the back of this. And I knew then I'd made a mistake, that this car, though I love you're saying about earlier that guys like cars. I grew up with pictures of Lamborghinis and Ferraris on my wall.
Yeah.
So I enjoy cars as well. This car didn't fit my lifestyle, but I only figured that after I got the vanity plates that say never settle, right? Because that's what you need as a 22-year-old driving that car is vanity plates that say never settle. But it was when I was trying to shove my snowboard in the back that I was like, this isn't going to work for me. And I ended up selling it back, lost tens of thousands of dollars on it. So when I heard your story, I was like, oh, similar car story. Because you ended up selling that one back too, right?
I did. Yeah. I sold it back. And then, yes. And then I hung out with my MDX for a while. And then I was like, and then I felt ready to get another car. And I was like, I just wanted one that really represented who I was.
Sure.
And I ended up getting a Mini Cooper. And I love my Mini Cooper. I don't have the tiny one. I got the,
wow.
I got the family version. It's like a 4-door, but I love my Mini. It's like quirky, fun. It's speedy still. It feels like
It's amazing.
Driving a little go-kart, and every time I get in, I'm like, yeah, I really love my car.
This works. So my question is though, when you sold the car back to the dealership, how hard was it for the dealer to find someone else who was also secret agent, Yanik Silver?
They changed the door.
Do they change? They sand it off or something?
I'm sure they can redo that for what they paid me for. They have plenty of margin.
They have lots of money to do that.
Yeah, I did feel like an idiot though selling it back. Whereas I was like, I wonder how many younger guys they have come in here and sell it back and be like, well, all right, there's another one. And I'm like, whatever.
That would be a hard kind of gut check.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone, a business owner that's listening right now, that's considering a pivot? So whether it's into a new business, whether it's a business that they're doing, that their heart is maybe not into it anymore. Maybe it's a car they've got to sell back. What would you say to help them navigate that?
I'd say that you really want to check in with yourself, especially like journaling is a great process for it. It's just getting, hearing yourself out, whatever is going through your head. Because so a lot of times we have all the exact same thoughts rolling around in our head, and then journaling has actually been scientifically proven to make us happier because you create a beginning, middle, and end of that story on paper. And so just whatever is the stuff that's rolling around, and it's going to be a lot of stuff from what does this say about me? What does this mean? But it's like everyone knows the answer. It's just like we don't want to hear it a lot of times. And so then it's like getting that awareness of being okay. And you're going to be okay no matter what, because as an entrepreneur, this is what we do. We make stuff out of nothing. We figure out things. And so that never goes away. But if you're feeling like, so I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who, come into Maverick and are already successful. And a lot of times they get introduced to more ways that they can make a greater impact. And then they're like, oh, well, this is what I really want to do, but I don't want to lose everything I built beforehand. And so it's creating that plan where it could be a transition plan, it could be an exit, it could be whatever it is. But if you've fallen out of love with your company, then it either means that you want to re-engineer it so that you are fully in love with it, or it's time to move on in some way. And it is it is a risk, but you're gonna have to take that risk regardless. And so I would rather be more fully alive risking than I would trying to diminish myself to fit what I used to be.
That's so good. That's so good. I love when you're saying this is what we do. We make something out of nothing, and we have a high risk tolerance. This is just another risk.
Right.
That's so important. One thing I want to point out when you're talking about journaling. So I'm a huge fan of journaling as well. Have done it since I was a kid. I have stacks of journal. In fact, I'll tell a quick story. I had a house fire when I was 19, 20. And sure enough, after I drug my roommate out, who had indulged that night and didn't wake up when the house was on fire, I drug her out by her left foot. But once I was done dragging her out, the next thing I went back in for was my journals.
Wow.
Which was funny because the fire department shows up and I come out with like tons of these journals. They're like, what the hell's that? I'm like, it's my journals. So I'm a huge fan of journaling as well.
That's awesome.
One thing I'll point out about journaling is I love that it has a beginning, middle, and end. You kind of bookend the story. The other thing that journaling can do is it helps us to articulate our fears. Because when we're facing a big decision, what's often at kind of what's causing us a lot of pain and a lot of procrastination is fear. We're afraid. I'm afraid if I give back the car, I'm going to look like a failure, either to the car dealership or to my friends or to my family, to my wife. And so when we journal, it's a place where we can really ask that question, what am I afraid of? And then I would encourage you to ask the second question, okay, what am I really afraid of? Or what's the worst that can happen? And I think that's just so powerful. It's the place where we can really get in touch with what we're afraid of, which is causing that hesitancy. And, shame cannot survive being spoken, Brene Brown quote. But once we say it out loud, like, well, I'm afraid I'm going to fail at this, like I failed at this other thing, it diminishes its power over us. So I just want to point out another amazing thing about journaling.
I have this little concept of the fear monster, and it's like bringing voice to this little fear monster. And especially like when COVID started, I like literally wrote from the fear monster, and I'm like, okay, well, what could happen here? Our business is related a lot to travel. What, go down significantly.
Sure.
All these things going on. What if I get COVID? What if I end up in the hospital? What if I end up in a ventilator? Like all these things. And then by voicing it, like you said, it takes away a lot of its power. So this is the little befriend the fear monster. It's one of the cards. And then, what I did one time with Maverick members is really, really powerful. So, these are 7, 8, 9-figure entrepreneurs, and they were talking about, okay, what do they really want to do? And then we did an exercise of like putting in your fears anonymously into this little box. And then we all took turns reading random ones that you pulled out of there. And it's fascinating to see how similar they were. But then we made them fun by using a different accent or some sort of voice character or something, and then it made it, brought some more levity to it, and so then it just really kind of like diminished that aspect. But you have to bring awareness to it first. You have to bring a voice to it first.
Yeah. And I love that exercise. And I also love the similarity. Like we think that the thing we're grappling with is unique to us.
Right.
Nah, we're humans, we're flawed, and everyone else is struggling with very similar issues. We just think they're not. But then when you can anonymously share, it's amazing how similar the struggles are.
Yeah. I mean, I heard a quote from Oprah Winfrey, and she's like, my ultimate fear is that I won't reach my ultimate destiny. I'm like, oh, wow. That's Oprah talking.
Yeah. One of the most successful women on this planet.
And that's, that's something that I've felt a lot too, like not reaching your full potential. And so it's like, wow, that's really, really powerful.
It's relevant to whether you're Oprah or whether you're a 21-year-old who's at university going, well, what am I meant to do? What's my purpose? Yeah. They're struggling with the same thing. So I love that we talked about journaling. So we talked about some success practices. Can you share some other things, whether that's morning routine? I heard meditation as well. What are some of the success practices that have helped you be successful at the things you've tackled so far?
Yeah. Well, journaling again, but journaling, like make sure that you give yourself time to do it. Like, so have like, if you want to make this experiment, like for me, it's before bed. And so I also like using like a set of colored pens. And so, you can add in all sorts of things to it. But make it just continually doing it is helping. Same thing with meditation, is that same thing, like, just try it out, and anything related to health. Like, before I had said, like, doing these experiments with no alcohol or no sugar or whatever it is. And then you can add it back in if you want, or different ways. And then you start seeing like what what is a habit that you've developed that has been an unconscious habit, and what is one that you want to develop that is really intentional. And so like drinking was an interesting one too, where like I couldn't remember, this was many years back, I couldn't remember like one night without having a bourbon or a glass of wine or a beer or whatever. But it's just one, maybe, maybe two, but it wasn't, but it was like every single night.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the heck is going on? I don't want to be beholden to this. And so then I tried that experiment of 33 days. And then literally at midnight on the 33rd day, I'm like on my front step of my house. I'm like, I'm just going to have this hard cider. And so it was really fascinating. So it didn't quite stick, but then I did it again. And then it turned into like very consciously deciding, when do I want to have alcohol or not? Like if I'm having a great meal, I want to pair it with something, but intentionally deciding. And so figuring out, what does that look like? So my daily practices that I continue right now are meditation, yoga, probably like 4 or 5 times a week, and journaling every single night. And also just, like taking moments to breathe. It's interesting how we don't breathe properly. And there's a great book called, I think it's just called Breathe by James Nestor. And it's about how do we use that simple process to actually change our state. And so finding times during the day to just be like, oh, I can, in between Zoom calls, especially so many of them, like let's find some time to actually breathe. Take
some intentional breaths. Yeah. So I love the no drinking thing, because I'm actually on one of those right now. So I enjoy wine. I enjoy scotch immensely. My personal trainer had convinced me to stop while I broke my ankle at a mastermind retreat a few weeks back. And she said, okay, just while you're in the cast, let's do no drinking, and there was something else that I'm not doing. I think it was gluten-free. Anyways, pretty much a really restrictive diet. With no alcohol. And I was like, oh, okay, yes, we're going to do this. So I'm still in it. I just got the cast off today, and I met with her this morning, and she's like, are you going back to it? I said, you know what? I'm going to wait a little bit. And
how long was it?
It's probably been 5 weeks now.
Okay. And do you feel a difference?
God, I don't want to admit it, but
I know, yes,
right? I know. I don't want to, I'm going to be honest. I don't want to give it up. I enjoy it.
And that's the thing too. Like, you don't have to give it up.
You don't have to.
It's just, where is it intentional versus
that's where it is. I
Yeah.
want it to be intentional. I've got next weekend going to the mountains, a cabin with some friends. It'll happen there for sure. But being intentional, and you enjoy it more then, versus this unconscious habit that you're just doing every night, and you're not really thoroughly enjoying it either.
And the other thing that's really fascinating about it too is you get more sensitive. Like, so I really believe entrepreneurs very intuitive. Like, so, Richard Branson has talked a lot about intuition. Oprah's talked about that. And I think that your intuition gets a little bit numbed by these different things too.
Sure.
So I'll notice, like, it might be 2 days and it also depends on what I have. Like, if something's more clean versus sulfites and wine or whatever it is.
Sure.
There's a difference. Like, if I have a beer versus I have, very clean tequila.
Yeah.
There's also a difference too.
For sure. Agreed. Someone was just telling me that, I was Michelle Seiler Tucker that I interviewed. She's this amazing mergers and acquisitions expert. She said she was a tequila drinker. We were talking about scotch. And she said, I only do tequila. It's more natural. And I was like, oh, it is. Well, this is something I can wrap my arms around. So she was making the tequila pitch the other day.
Sure.
So
it's funny. I never drank tequila, and then my neighbor, everyone has like a bad tequila experience usually as a kid. Or something.
Everybody does. Everybody does.
Young adult, whatever. And then my neighbor really was into it, and he brought over like $150 bottle for my birthday.
It's good.
And, well, first of all, I was like, Steve, I don't drink tequila. He's like, oh, it's okay. When I come over, I'll just have it. And then I ended up like, oh, okay, I'll have it. So then he turned me onto that, but it was really,
so he left this bottle at your house.
Yeah, for him.
He's like a dealer. The first one's always free. That's what he was doing right there.
Yeah, it was for him.
Oh, that's awesome. So one thing I want to talk about sabotage, but before I ask that question, you mentioned that your previous businesses, that you seem to have this Midas touch. Like I got involved and bam, we're at 7 figures. What do you attribute that to? And is that something that can be taught to other people that don't have the Midas touch?
So what I attribute it to is, a lot of people are like, oh, overnight success, but what they don't know is overnight success took 10 years because I was honing my skills, and then the skills were high leverage skills like copywriting and direct response, and also relationship building. So that was like, so one of my mentors was Earl Nightingale through audio. Like I'm a big fan. Like I think your life changes through the books you read or material you study, the people you meet, and the experiences that you have. And so very early on, I really just assimilated what Earl would talk about, which is you become an expert in any subject if you study for 1 hour a day for 3 years, or if you study for 1 hour a day for 5 years, you become a world-class expert. And I'm like, oh, what happens if you do it for 2 hours a day? And so I just dove deep.
Such an entrepreneur approach.
Yeah.
Like, I'll see 1 hour a day, Earl, and I will double that.
Yeah, but then the commitment to continually doing it, right?
Sure.
And that was the copywriting and the psychology of marketing and influence and different things. And I was just because I was also fascinated by it, like the curiosity of like, how do you get somebody who you don't know to give you money? Like, and it was intriguing. Like I couldn't believe that could happen. And also it was also like self-preservation, because I hated cold calling on doctors as well. So so then I got really, really good at it. And I used those skills that developed over many years to then apply them in a way that had higher leverage, which was the internet. So I, that would be, I don't know if there's a way of being like, yeah, do this, because everyone's path is a little bit different.
Sure.
But if you look at it from high leverage skills, then that is one way of helping assure some success.
Yeah.
And then there's a second part that you asked too, and I can't remember that now.
So I was going to ask a question about sabotage, but I feel like you answered my question about the Midas touch and how we can, what you attribute it to and the skills about that. So one of the other things we talk about here at PivotMe is that, we talk about high performance habits and success principles, things like that. But we also, us pivoters know that usually the biggest hurdle to our success is us, whether that's our mindset. We think it's our skill set, but usually it's our mindset. My question is, speaking of self-sabotage, how do you self-sabotage? And then how do you get yourself out of your own way?
Yeah, what a good question. So if I think it's really worth exploring this aspect of shadows and shadow parts. So there's our light part, and which is like kind of like what we always want to hold out into the world as here's the parts that I'm great at, and here's these things, but they also have a flip side to it. So like I look at my role as to catalyze the catalyst. And so one of those archetypes is catalyst, which means that I love starting, which as the shadow side of that, the flip side is not always finishing what I start. So then it's like bringing awareness to it helps. So then it's like, okay, who loves to finish, and then helping, bring them in is one way of helping, avoid these self-sabotage aspects. But then also when you start going deeper, so I did a lot of work with a woman named Carolyn Mace, MYSS, and she has a couple books on archetypes and different things like that, and sacred contracts. And then she has this process of like creating a wheel of 12 houses. And one of the wheels, so there's a couple archetypes that everyone has, and one is called the prostitute. And it's like, what would you do for money? And then the other one was the, I think it was just self-sabotage was the archetype. And so mine was the artist, was self-sabotage. And it was interesting because it's like, if I'm not 1,000% committed to something, like I don't feel, then I'll self-sabotage in some way. And as I've been like going deeper in many concepts and spiritual concepts, like the Bhagavad-Gita is one of the oldest spiritual books, and it talks about this idea that we're only entitled to our labor and not the fruits of our labor. And that's really difficult for a lot of entrepreneurs to get their mind around, which is like, we're like, what is the sales numbers? What is this? Like, unless that happens, then we're not successful and we're not happy about it. But truly just putting your heart and soul into something is the actual reward. And then most of the time, it actually ends up being bigger than you would have imagined, but not always, but that's the reward in and of itself. So that self-sabotaging part was, if it wasn't truly my art, and I think business is art, I think entrepreneurship is art, then I wasn't willing to put it out into the world in a bigger way. Like if it just wasn't feeling fully like what it was. And one of the best ways that my best my favorite project that this came forth was something called the Cosmic Journal, whereas, I've talked about it a bunch of times here, journaling, we love journaling. But I saw this art challenge going around for 100 days to do a piece of art every day. I'm like, wow, that's a lot. I travel around a lot. I don't know if I can commit to that. But in my journal, I wrote about what would that look like and what would the byproducts be. And I'm like, all right. And I think every challenge that you do, like, you actually get stronger because you make that commitment and keep that promise to yourself. So your integrity rises. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to do a journal page every single day. And so it was like so they all turned into these like hand-drawn journal pages every single day. And then after about, I don't know, 40 days or so, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I started using like an Oracle. And then like, it was like my favorite part of the day. It didn't matter if it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, I would just get one of these pages done. And then I had no intention of publishing it. And one of my friends saw how much I lit up when I was talking about this thing. He's like, I'm gonna pay to create these vegan leather versions for you. And so he paid to do that. And then I had another friend introduce me to Reed Tracy, who's the president of Hay House, like the biggest transformational self-development publisher out there. And Reed was like, I've never seen anything like this. So they fast-tracked this version. And then we also had, and then a set of cards came out with it too, which is ones I've been showing you. But it's like the most inflow magical project that never really. So that was how I overcame self-sabotage, was just creating it for myself.
That's amazing. So I assume they're available for sale, and we can put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, they're available, on Amazon or wherever, Hay House.
That is awesome. We will definitely put that in the show notes. What a great idea. And I love this whole challenge, whether it's 100 days or your original comment about 33 days, but committing to a certain amount of days that you're either journaling or creating art or journaling with art. What a powerful technique. It's a great way to go inside instead of just busy ourselves with all the day-to-day stuff.
Or just something that you just love. I call it a cosmic checkbox. Like, what do you really, really love? Like, just do that each day, and then without attachment to what happens from it.
Sure.
See.
One thing I wanted to ask you about on the business front is your insight on a digital marketing strategy after COVID. So things have changed. The market has changed. Some really good things have come out of this as well, and some inherent challenges. What is the insight on how we should change our strategy going forward?
There's some. I mean, I think people are getting way more comfortable with Zoom and virtual events. Of course, there's that Zoom fatigue and so forth. But it's like embracing what it can do, which is bringing together people from all over the planet, really.
Oh yeah.
And so you're able to do more. Like we would do a lot of events, and now we're going to do a lot of virtual things, as well as keeping the live events, because you can't substitute the magic of what happens there.
Sure.
But you can do different things, and been having a lot of success with like having small breakout rooms that happen and allowing people to come together, and you can have a pretty good deep connection.
Yeah.
But it won't happen by accident. There's also like, how do you facilitate it? How do you orchestrate it and choreograph it? And so I think this post-COVID aspect of that is still going to be important, which has always been important to me, which is how do you build community and you want people to feel like they're part of something bigger. The other thing that I see happening is that this pause really helped entrepreneurs, especially, but everyone's be like, okay, well, what's most important to me?
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see it from this acceleration of buying behavior changing.
Yeah.
So this has always been a part of it. So one of the books I wrote is called Evolved Enterprise, which is how business can make a greater impact in the world. And it was based on consumer buying behavior changing, where they want to buy from companies that have a greater mission and purpose. I see this accelerating even more about, okay, well, what really matters? And then for the entrepreneurs themselves, deciding, okay, what really matters and what are the companies that I want to start? So having that impact really baked into everything that happens.
Yeah. Having the impact and then communicating the impact as well. So
exactly. Yeah. Nobody knows unless you share that story with them.
Exactly. Actually, it's funny because I actually watched you speaking earlier today, and you were talking about Evolved Enterprise, and you were talking about companies and how important it is to have their mission a piece of this. And it actually made me reflect on, so I run the consulting firm Maven, but PivotMe, the podcast, we don't communicate what we're passionate about from like a contribution standpoint. So I'm, you and I have talked about this a little bit. I'm very, very focused on microfinance. I've done a lot of humanitarian work, a lot of travel. It's made me very passionate about microfinancing opportunities, particularly in developing countries. And I'm super fired up about it, always supporting Kiva. That's the particular organization that I've supported through the years, probably about 10, 12 years now. But we're not visible about that. In fact, we were going to have someone from Kiva on, and I was going to interview them. And that's sort of been on the Asana board for a while. And it was hearing your talk earlier today that made me say, we need to move this up the priority. We need to interview this person, one, to give visibility to microfinance opportunities and why they're important and why they work so well, even better than the humanitarian work I've done. And I'll just say it. I'll leave out the agency, but I've worked a lot with 2 different agencies, and we go around and we do amazing things. We build houses and set up water filtration projects and stuff. But even when someone has a house, that doesn't mean they have food. That doesn't mean they have a way to support their family. When you support someone starting a business, a tailoring shop, a fruit stand, all those kind of micro enterprise, then you've given them an actual tool to lift themselves out of poverty. But what was so interesting is I realized we weren't communicating that. That's not something we've ever talked about on the podcast.
I mean, and I think it could be integrated into what you're doing. So imagine if it was like, hey, so-and-so guest, every episode we do $500 in micro lending for Kiva. And is there a particular country that you are really associated with, or is there a particular, whatever, and then let them be involved in it as well. And then it's almost like a great way of making them feel awesome, and then incorporating it in. Another way could be based on downloads that you donate more. But I don't know. I mean, there's so many ways of incorporating it, and then it's like how far, like when does it feel like it's just a marketing ploy versus fully integrated and authentic to what you're doing. And so that's also part of what I see post COVID. I mean, it's really true. Like this whole decade is this transformative decade, I think, and authenticity is huge.
So your organization is involved with a micro enterprise company,
right?
Yeah,
we do a lot. Everything, the umbrella of entrepreneurship is what I care about.
Okay, that's amazing.
Village Enterprise. So the founders of Kiva actually came from Village Enterprise, and we've supported Village Enterprise for a long time to do a lot of work in Africa, training micro entrepreneurs, and it's more of a grant model. And then so anything to further entrepreneurship, self-sufficiency, and that hand up instead of a handout kind of process.
So huge. It's huge. I love it. Once I saw about Village Enterprise on your website, and I thought, oh, this is just one more thing that we got to talk about.
Totally.
Let me ask you this. What got you into that? What made you passionate about it? Is it something you've seen? Again, we're looking for a pivot point. Is there something that you saw? Is there some experience that you've had? What made you passionate about that?
Well, I don't know. It's been wired into me. Like I love the underdog, and I love helping support, what people perceive as the underdog, and how do we make them a greater advantage instead of it feeling like they're at a disadvantage.
Sure.
So, and maybe that's my immigrant mentality of, coming here with nothing essentially, or a couple $100 in my dad's pocket, and then starting. My dad started his own company and doing that and seeing that process. So I think that's always been embedded. And then the first time that it really, really came out was I did something called Yanik's 30th birthday bash. And not everyone knows this, but so it was like in January. My birthday's in September, but I came up with the idea in August, and it's like way too late, obviously, to do an event in September. And we decided to do one where it was like all the entire ticket price went to Make-A-Wish. And it was like the first really big event in the internet marketing space. There's about 500 some people there. Wow. And we raised $25,000 for Make-A-Wish, and it was really awesome. And it's just really cool to see that be a big part of our messaging and how people got around it as well. And then I got more particular about, okay, well, what do we really want to support? It's, entrepreneurship and so forth.
Sure. And it's a model that works. It's not just because we're entrepreneurs and we're passionate about entrepreneurism. It's because the model works. I mean, it's a fantastic model, and it really does serve the purpose, doesn't just make us feel good about our nonprofit dollars going somewhere. Like it actually works. And I separate those two things because there's a lot of initiatives that aren't working. And so this model really works.
Well, I think that we can take all our global issues and overlay a piece of entrepreneurship on top of it in some way. And then that's the real, I don't know, unique way of helping solve some of these issues. It's like, how do we create incentive for everyone involved? And I love this idea of like a win-win-win-win across the board. And so how do we create an empowered economic incentive for everyone to get involved?
If you're looking for even more ways to level up your business and your life, we have set up the next video for you. I'll see you over there.